You know, in this day and age, it's not uncommon to hear of a terrorist attack somewhere around the world every single day. There's no question, terrorism is on the rise. Last year, worldwide, attacks were up some 25%, and this year, we're on par to go even higher. Now, the latest was a car bomb that tore through a neighborhood in Beirut, Lebanon, the second bombing there in recent days. Of course, Lebanon has been the scene of a fierce fighting now for the past 3 days. Artillery and machine gun fire has echoed around a crowded Palestinian refugee camp in Tripoli, Lebanon's second largest city. Lebanese troops there have ordered to finish off the al-Qaeda-linked Fatah Islam militants there. Dozens on both sides have been killed so far. Of course, Lebanon is just one of more than 100 countries infiltrated with underground al-Qaeda cells. What they're learning now, though, is this, and that is al-Qaeda may not be our biggest concern in this war on terror. Enter the new terrorists being spawned all over the world. They're called baby al-Qaeda. This new generation is more loosely defined, more evasive, and more dangerous. Joining me now to talk about this and more on this new brand of terrorist is Hassan Haqqani. He's an author and former diplomat who has served as an advisor to 3 Pakistani prime ministers, and he spent a lot of time studying Muslim political movements. Mr. Haqqani, are these political movements, or rather religious movements, or even extreme terrorist movements?
Well, for one thing, Art, we must understand that terrorists are always a small group of people in any movement, and their ability to terrorize large numbers of people and to continue to replenish their ranks is what is their biggest strength. So what we have in the Muslim world is, of course, large Islamic movements, but small terrorist groupings within them that in the aftermath, especially of 9/11 and the Iraq War, are continuing to find new recruits and organize in new places, thereby stretching the need for greater intelligence on them.
You describe them as small terrorist cells. I think I already know the answer to this question. I'll ask it anyway. They're small, but just how big of an impact might they have?
Well, for one thing, of course, one suicide bomber can take down hundreds of people with him. There were only 19 hijackers on 9/11, and look at the impact they had. So the important thing is not the number of terrorists, but their targets and their ability to reach those targets.
Well, you're an author, and I have one of your articles here that you wrote for the American Civil Liberties Union, and you say, and I want to quote from your article, the U.S. and its allies have frozen $130 million in terrorist assets worldwide since 9/11. I'm sure the figure's higher now. But this pales against the readily available drug money that can continue to finance terrorism for years. Talk to me about this drug money. Is that the base of where they're getting the money for their operations?
Well, it's not necessarily the base. It's certainly the base in Afghanistan. We must understand that 24 out of 28 Afghanistan provinces are now growing opium poppy. So you can imagine the official GDP of Afghanistan is around $4 billion, and the drug trade out of Afghanistan is about $3 billion. So you can imagine what impact and what influence drug traders have in the region. Now, terrorists need respectability. It's very difficult to go to a village and say, and by the way, I'm a drug trafficker. So what they do is they bridge the drug trafficking, which is the means of finding financial sustenance, and there are professional drug traffickers who get respectability by saying, and we are doing this for a greater cause. And that is exactly what is happening in the border areas between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which we all know now is Al-Qaeda's central headquarters at the moment.
And you also write in your article that some 70%, perhaps more, of al-Qaeda's senior leadership has been wiped out at this point, but yet the number of those cells continues to grow. So I'm wondering, are we into sort of a cycle where no matter how much you take off from the top, there's still the root system that's bringing up new growth?
Art, here's what happened. After 9/11, President Bush declared war against terrorism. And in doing that, a critical error was made. It was assumed that Al-Qaeda is like, say, for example, the army of a nation with a general at the top and a lieutenant general next and a major general next. Well, guess what? They decided to adapt. Even though their top leaders were killed, they allowed a greater flexibility in leadership. people can organize a cell on their own. It's a bit more like a franchise. Al-Qaeda is not a top-down organization anymore. What is happening now is baby Al-Qaedas, as I call them, are emerging, meaning Art and Hussein can sit down and say, we agree with Al-Qaeda's objectives or whatever, and create a cell of our own. We may not even know anybody in Al-Qaeda Central. And so what is happening now is a lot more of those new organizations that are very loose, that are not connected to a central organization, and therefore do not come on the radar screen until they have already waged a terrorist attack. They are the ones that are emerging, and they are the ones that are threatening us more.
Well, they are loosely defined, but that's not to say that they don't have some organization about them. They are organized enough to at least get started. Obviously, we're familiar with what happened at Fort Dix in New Jersey just very recently here, but they were caught in a very amateurish manner in what they did by going into a store to have a copy of a tape made. Now, how silly was that? So the point is, they may not be quite as sophisticated, but that doesn't make them any less dangerous, does it?
Absolutely. The important thing is, the good news, of course, is that baby Al-Qaedas are likely to be more amateur. But the bad news is they all learn from the losses of other cells and groups. So whatever has happened in Fort Dix, or whatever happened in Toronto before, or in London before that, they're all reading about it. There are internet sites where they get to learn about each other. They get to learn about what mistakes were made, and they try to avoid them. So it's only a matter of time before some of these groups become more and more sophisticated. In any case, some of them have managed to wage sophisticated attacks even with the participation of amateurs. London attacks were a case in point, the underground attacks, subway attacks in London. Spain, train bombings involved some amateurs, people who were not professionally trained as terrorists in a terrorist training camp. And we are seeing more and more of one professional hooking up with several amateurs and still managing to have deadly consequences.
Well, they're on the radar screen now. Baby Al-Qaeda out there in the communities, and people are on the lookout for them. And we thank you very much for sharing your insights with us on this matter. And hopefully we'll talk again.
Pleasure talking to you.
Take good care.